Commissioner Swenson. Here. Commissioner Tropila.
Here.
Commissioner Kontrowitz.
Present.
Commissioner Humble.
Here.
Commissioner Robinson.
Here.
Commissioner Moran is here. Again, we'd like to invite anyone that has comments throughout both the agenda and the work session to simply raise your hand, be acknowledged, come forward, and if you have any comments that you'd like to make, we certainly encourage that. We'll move right to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion vote by any board member. We're asking for approval of board minute meetings from March 27th. We're asking for approval for payroll checks totaling $89,970.85. Maintenance and operation checks totaling $309,562.38. Approval of the passenger facility charge totaling $75,000. And the financial reports which were included in the packet for March. Is there a motion for approval?
Mr. Chairman, I so move.
All right. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, if anybody, same sign? All right. Consent agenda is approved. We'll go right to the director's report on the capital funding plan. Director Faulkner.
Yes, we've got a lot on the director's report this month, so I'll jump right into it. The capital funding plan, again, as we finish up our financial budget, we'll be looking at the capital funding plan as part of that this year because of the reshuffling and the match. And also the optimization study and a couple other things are actually going to change our capital plan. We want to do a major update to that plan probably in the next month and a half to show some of the changes that we'll be talking about a little later with the optimization plan. And then the terminal project too, we'll have a better idea here in about 3 weeks where we are with the terminal project. So at that point, we'll, along with the operating budget, we'll do a major overhaul in the capital funding plan. But some other items we want to cover. I'll pass this memo around to everyone. This is subject to this memo. There's no current action requested from the board on this. We didn't add an agenda item, but as we reported in the weekly report, I think it's been probably 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, the Army Reserve has notified the airport of their intent to terminate their lease effective 4/30. So at the end of the month, their lease does allow a 30-day termination. I'll give you a few seconds. Just the first paragraph kind of summarizes the situation, so I'll give you a few seconds to look through that. Oh, go ahead.
While we're looking through this, is there still any interest by the College of Technology for the building?
There's not, and we'll get into that a little bit. The building, this building was constructed on a land lease struck in 1956. It was a $1 a year lease, which is essentially how we do free leases. Yeah, they were not allowed anymore, but back in 1956, the airport revenue policy didn't exist, so it was allowed back then. So they constructed this building, and as of a couple of weeks ago, they notified us that they want to terminate the lease and leave the improvements in place. To boil things down to their most basic elements, there's a disagreement of the lease language as to whether or not they can do that. They contend that the agreement says that they're, and it does say that they're not required to remediate the premises or return the premises to its original condition. However, the premises up in the very first paragraph is defined as land. In about paragraph 4, the lease says that the government can construct improvements and structures, and ownership of those will remain with the government. And that's all that it basically ever says about improvements and structures. They have the right to tear it down when they like. We can't say anything about that, but nowhere in the lease does it infer that we would inherit improvements or structures. So that's the tenement of the argument between us. We've talked to Mick about it. He did respond to the letter within 4 days of receiving the initial notification. It's now been 3 weeks, and we've received no counter response from the Corps of Engineers. I talked to him last night. They had asked, they called and asked for a meeting today, and just simply we couldn't get them the schedule. We had told them that 3 weeks ago when they sent the original letter that we could meet with them on the 25th, but the 23rd and 24th we booked up with me coming back in town after a couple weeks of travel. And so, you know, we told them there's not much to meet about anyway. It seems like there's a disagreement here as to what you want to do with the building, and you know, it's somewhat pointless for us to, you know, meet with your maintenance crew and talk about the transfer of the building because we don't agree to it. Looking down through this this memo, the improvement vitals themselves, there's 2 buildings out there. The remainder of the site's paved with asphalt. The first building is a 30,000 square foot center block building. If you've been through it, some of you have, I think, it resembles a school, almost like a grade school. It's got a number of classrooms, it's got a few administrative offices, it's got a large gymnasium cafeteria space. It reminds me of where I went to grade school. But the problem with that is it's not immediately transferable to any other use. It doesn't make for good office space, it doesn't make for good industrial space. The building itself has a number of likely code violations. The electrical system doesn't appear to be up to any kind of standard. There's no sprinklers. And on top of that, there's been some internal construction that certainly wouldn't meet code. There's kind of a, you know, a mezzanine storage area with some chicken wire and stalls and 2x4s that have been put up there to lock supplies away that they didn't want people to get. You know, so it truly is, you know, kind of a haphazard mess over there in a couple of those areas. The reason we had talked to MSU about it is they can get grants because they're a government agency. There are grants available, you know, for a brownfield site like that to remediate it and turn it into something, you know, other than what it is. And it sets up fairly well as a school building. So we thought it might make some sense there. Their biggest hesitation is the size of it. 30,000 square foot is a large building. And, you know, they would only have need for a fraction of that space. Also inside that main building is a shooting range, an indoor shooting range. The second building is a 2-bay shop building. It's a standard basic shop building. But actually, you know, we wouldn't mind inheriting that one. We could find some use for it. Most of our equipment wouldn't fit, but, you know, pickups and that type of thing, you know, we might be able to, you know, to use something like that. Environmental concerns. To date, the Corps has transmitted no environmental information on the site. Again, 1956 construction leads me to believe at some point it likely had an underground tank somewhere. They've not confirmed that. You know, when we've asked them about it, they've said simply that they can't find record of that. You know, it did have a shooting range. When we've talked to them about that, they were uncertain what mitigations were done. It also had asbestos tile. We know that. They said that the kind of flooring that's in there now typically would mean they remediated it, but they couldn't at the time tell us whether or not that had been done.
Is that floor tile or ceiling tile?
Floor tile. You know, the ceiling tiles, I think they did say had been remediated.
I think they have. Yeah.
And the piping, it's just uncertain. You know, you just don't know going through the building how much of the insulation still would be asbestos or not. The boiler's about 30 years old, so it probably doesn't have asbestos right there in the main room. But the boiler itself is probably near it's the end of its useful life, and it's a healthy sized boiler. That would not be inexpensive. You know, so the building itself has a number of environmental mitigations that we're concerned about, that we've not been provided any documentation on, and obviously we're forced to, you know, consider the worst in those cases. Other concerns: the main building, like I said, very large, not likely to be reused very easily for industrial uses. It doesn't have any docks. It doesn't have any large doors. It doesn't have major power. You know, it's not set up for any kind of industrial use. It's not set up for office use. A lot of the spaces are bigger than an office and open and conjoined rooms where you've got 2 classrooms stuck together. You know, and so I mean, it would take some serious attention to convert it, and then you would still have a building that looks like a school converted into offices. So, you know, we just don't think it's a good candidate unless we could find, you know, like a school or someone that would want it. We think most likely it's going to be at about a $450,000 demolition cost. We talked to CH2M Hill and they provided us some estimates just based on the sheer size of the building, and assuming that the site has been remediated and clean, we think it would be $500,000 to remove the improvements that sit out there today. And it could be upwards from that. It really could be. So it's not an incidental cost that you know it's being proposed that we inherit. It's a fairly substantial cost, particularly for an entity that only had a $1 lease for 50 years. It seems like an extraordinary cost for them to ask us to inherit. And our opinion is it's a case of the the big guy wanting to push around the little guy and thinking they can based on the full might and power of the federal government. So in this case, I think we have no choice but to refuse the transfer of the building, and that's what we've got down below. We plan to. We are told we'll receive a second letter this week, but they will continue to press their case that they want to give us the building. Time is fleeting, the 30th is next Monday. So we plan to respond to that as quickly as we possibly can, given that we haven't received anything yet. I'm not sure when that'll be, but we would hope to do that within a day. We want to conduct a phase 1. Rod and I talked about this morning, and actually talked to John Van Woensel too, who's worked on a number of BRAC projects. The federal agencies, particularly DoD-related agencies, are not always the best at documenting the in-case, the baseline. There have been a number of cases where sites have been transferred with questionable environmental conditions. The government, I know, has been doing some environmental work out there to baseline what's there. They haven't shared any of that with us. We think it's incumbent upon us to do our own baseline, establish our own end-of-condition report that would tell us what's there so that we know who's responsible for that. Should we lease the building as is, even to Mang? At some point in the future, if there were remediation, we would have to go back and try to determine who should do that remediation. So we think it's incumbent upon us now to go out and baseline the site, see what's there, document it, so that if there has to be a cleanup in the future, we know who would be responsible for that. So I think we are going to move forward with a phase 1 environmental out there, as they terminate the lease. The other thing I think we need to do is investigate legal options for some type of injunction. Obviously, if they begin cutting the utilities over there, we can all see how that could be very problematic come wintertime and could potentially cause significant damage to the site and surrounding infrastructures. I don't know how they might pursue forcing a transfer of the building, but I think we need to look into that and see if there's something we can do legally to at least hold the situation in the current status until we can get it resolved between the parties. And then the last thing I think it's incumbent upon us to do, the FAA in the revenue policy does not allow us to give free rent to anyone, including federal agencies. This has been a source of great frustration between the agencies for years, but the DOT has held to the fact that their funding is limited. They buy land for airport uses, and anyone that uses that property, including the federal government, should pay for that. Should they terminate the lease, which predates the FAA revenue policy, they will no longer be current on that lease. We've already notified them that should they do that, until they remove their improvements, we would charge them rent on a month-to-month tenancy. And I think it's incumbent upon us to enforce that, because again, the FAA tells us today that we can't allow uses for free on an airport. But then aside from that, the whole disagreement boils down to whose improvements they are. And given that we assert that it's their improvements, we need to have some legal instrument in place in case the whole thing falls down and causes damage to something else, or someone gets hurt, God forbid, in that building. We want to make sure it's clear that it's their responsibility. They are leasing the land until they remove those improvements. So that's the next steps we plan to implement. Again, we're not asking for board action today because there's unfortunately nothing to act on. But we did want to keep the board informed on this, as it is potential for both a legal and a properties and capital cost to us in the future.
I'm just trying to be clear about the numbers here. So you're talking around $300,000 just to demolish the property, and then you're saying another $500,000 if you were to retain the property, but get it to a point where it could be leased or at least environmentally sound.
We don't have an estimate on the cost to remediate the building and get it up to a current standard. The problem is I'm not sure what market you would aim for with a building like that. So we haven't even tried to estimate that. What we've done is we have walked through it, and we've actually had the facilities folks from MSU walk through it. We've kind of compared notes afterwards, and I think we all have the same concerns. There's unknown mitigations in there. It has a lot of areas like the shooting range that really, what would you do with it? They've taken out the elements that make it a shooting range, so now it's just a long, strange room with a concrete floor. So you end up with a lot of dead-end streets in that building, that you'd have to figure out what to do with. It has a massive safe built into the building for their armory. And although it sounds really cool, and we've been trying to think of great uses for that, practically speaking, who's going to want that? So we don't have a good estimate of changing the building over. To tear the thing out, just the building, if we leave the asphalt, which presumably anyone could use, but to tear the buildings out, we think it's about $450,000.
Okay. So that ties to this number here. Okay, so it's a major problem for us.
Oh, it is, and we had been telling the Corps for at least 6 months now that we wouldn't take the improvements, we didn't want the improvements. We told them that a number of times, and and we were somewhat surprised that they've chosen to enact a 30-day termination, and not have further discussions on that. But their lease does allow them a 30-day termination, so they're within the right to do that. The only problem is they've got to get the improvements out of there.
Questions for John on this? Brett?
Well, what would be our goal if we did sit down?
Well, I think to have it demolished. In all honesty, I think they need to remove the main building. We would probably still need to baseline the site, but I think a fair request would be remove the buildings and remediate any environmental damage, which they're required to do under the Superfund Acts as the owner of those improvements for all those years. I think that the other problem with the situation of that building is it's immediately on the main gate, and they've expressed some reservations about potential uses in there. There's certain users they wouldn't want in there because they share a chain link fence with the base, and the flight line is only a few hundred feet away. So for base security reasons, they want to be involved in who's there. They had expressed some interest in having the site. The problem is the building. They'd like to have the land, they just don't want the building either. It just seems as though no one wants the building.
Either of the buildings, or?
No, and again, I think we could find somebody that would use the shop. I mean, potentially we could use the shop, but quite frankly, that would be pennies on the dollar of knocking that thing down. It's just, I think, a metal building, if I remember right.
Any other questions for John?
I believe they still are responsible no matter what the law or the orders determine who's responsible for getting rid of the improvements. It seems like they only lease land, but if they're in charge of getting rid of any environmental issue.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Superfund Act makes that clear. It's cradle to grave, and clearly they've been the only user on the site. And that's why I think we want to do a baseline now so that we know exactly what's there before we inherit even the land back.
Anything else? No.
When will we start sending them a bill for their lease payment?
Well, if they terminate on April 30th, their first bill would come at the end of May.
For how much?
It's 8 acres, right? Is that what we determined? Oh, no, it's bigger than
Our regular square foot
yeah.
rent.
It'd be 12 cents a square foot, so, I mean, it would be a sizable amount of money. Is it only 3 acres? So it'd be about 120,000 square feet if it were 3 times, 10 cents would make it easy. About 12,000 a year, if it, maybe a little 15,000 a year, with a 12-cent rate.
Well, we wouldn't charge them lease for, because it's their building, I guess.
Why wouldn't you lease the building then?
Well, we don't want to inherit the improvements at any point. I think it's, this will be one of those chain of custody issues where, and that's what we've told them in our response is, we've never owned the building. The government's never transferred anything to us, up until now. So you've always been responsible for the improvements, as the lease says. The government will retain ownership of the improvements. So we want them to continue to retain that ownership, thus, charge them for the land and tell them to remove their improvements.
Any other questions? Thank you.
On to more happy subjects. I'll pass these around. These are some presentations we gave last week. Last week was the first of the Air Service conferences that we'll attend this year. This year I'm going to attend 3. Last year we attended 2. There's 2 main conferences. This is the CICSO conference. It's the Small Airport Western Service, and those are all different, by the way, so as you look at them, you can just pass them along. But the CICSO conference is the Small Airport Conference. It's attended by about a half dozen airlines. The second bigger conference will come later this year. It's the Jumpstart Conference, which is attended by most of the major legacy carriers. And then there's a third conference I'm going to go to this year, which is the Allegiant Conference. They have their very own conference that they host, and we've got some strategic things we're pursuing with them, so we're going to attend their conference. I haven't been to that one ever before. I was talking to Chris Jensen from Missoula a week or two ago, kind of to see what to expect, but we do want to work a little bit with Allegiant this year on some stuff, so we're going to attend their conference, even though it's the only conference that's hosted for just one airline. But things we learned last week, we met with a number of carriers. We met with two of our existing carriers, Alaska Airlines. If you've got that presentation, one of the interesting facts as we went through that is, other than a couple of long-haul routes like Seattle to Reagan and Seattle to Boston, we're the third or fourth highest ticket-priced market in their entire system, from the Alaska system. And quite frankly, I think the rates aren't that unreasonable. But it's interesting. Their system is typically much lower priced than even what we have. So they're fairly happy with our market right now, even though their load factors are below the other airlines in our market. And we have to share that flight with Helena. Because of the fat yields right now, they're fairly happy with the market performance. And their load factors have been creeping up fairly substantially over the last 2 years. So our goal, as we articulated with them, and they certainly agree with this goal, is to try and get off of that tag route as soon as we can over the next year or two. Tag route is what they call a flight that comes Seattle, Great Falls, and then down to Helena, and then goes, does the opposite in the afternoon. They only run one other of those still in their whole system, and so they want to get rid of that. They want us to have our own flight. They'd like Helena to have their own flight and have enough demand to fill those. So we're hopeful that we're growing to that point where they might consider that in the next year or two. So that's our near-term goal with Alaska. We also are working on some promotional stuff with them. Like last year, we've got a national parks program where we've negotiated discounts with local hotels and rental car companies. Also, the museums have given us discounts, and Alaska runs about a 15-20% discount on their tickets for folks that want to go to the national parks and book hotels or rental cars or something else as part of that package. So it's a real advantageous program, drives more traffic out of Seattle, brings some tourism to the area, and we're working with them again this year on that. Frontier Airlines, we met with them last week. They seem to be very happy with us. Just in terms of the advanced bookings, there were certainly no complaints there. I think they're a little bit surprised by the strength of the market in the early showings. Well, hopefully as the flights get closer to implementation on the 14th, we'll fill them in. I asked Stephanie to put our website up on the screen. Now I can tell you last year when I started looking at this Airfare Watchdog, see it scrolling on the left, it was often that there was nothing on there. Now and then, about half the time we have Allegiant flying to Mesa and Las Vegas on there. And this is a company, they go out and query the market through an algorithm, and they populate low fares. And so it's completely objective. It has to meet certain criteria as a low fare. So we don't have anything to do with it. This is just what our market now yields. Look at all those different markets now on our Airfare Watchdog and the pricing. I mean, it's just remarkable that the change over a year. There's at least 5, 6, 7, 8 cities on there that we can get to now, all of which are under $400. So we're pretty excited with with how the Frontier service is impacting our markets, and we're starting to hear a lot of great savings stories. As April, we saw both United and Delta dropping prices in our market in order to prepare for Frontier. We're hearing some great stories about people who are booking flights, even on the existing carriers, and saving quite a bit of money. So we're really excited with where this is going. We think it's off to a great start, and we're really hoping we can fill these Frontier flights. But a great tool and something to check out on our website if you're interested in traveling. It's a great place to look. American Eagle, we met with American Eagle last week, and they have a plan. If they're able to emerge from bankruptcy, they think they're going to renegotiate their scope clause, which means that the airline would be able to fly larger regional jets. Currently, the mainline carriers, the mainline pilot union doesn't allow them to do that. They're hopeful they'll get some flexibility to fly bigger regional jets, which would allow them to reach places like Montana. They had a surprising amount of interest in the Montana markets at the conference last week, and they're certainly anxious to spread their wings a little bit and try some of these new markets. However, if you saw at the end of the week, the pilot union did agree to be acquired by US Air. So it's real possible over the next month that we may lose yet another legacy carrier as American's purchased by US Air. Should that not happen, should they emerge from bankruptcy, I think it was a much more open and interesting conversation than I expected out of American. But should they emerge sometime later this year, they think about it late this year to early next year would be when they would emerge. We're hopeful we might have some future discussions with them about Montana as a market. We met with US Airways. US Airways, they weren't real interested in Montana right now, but one of the recent developments that I found really interesting is they had moved out of Phoenix. When they bought American West, they closed down that American West hub in Phoenix. They had cut a lot of the service into Phoenix. A ton of small markets lost service. As recently as a couple months ago, they signed a new agreement with SkyWest to pick up some of their capacity and put it into Phoenix. So the good news is there's a new carrier building routes in the West, which it's been a while since that's happened. And it's not an immediate thing that we're tracking because we're pretty far from Phoenix in terms of the markets they're building right now are fairly close in Albuquerque type markets. But a year or two down the road, maybe there'd be potential with US Airways, which would be great. We also met with a number of new point-to-point carriers. An interesting phenomenon in the market right now. There's a lot of new airlines out there proposing to enter the market. California Pacific's one we met with. They're based out of Carlsbad. Their intention would be to fly folks from secondary markets into San Diego via Carlsbad. If you know anything about San Diego, for many years they've been constrained because the airport just can't expand enough to get the demand in there. And there's been a bunch of proposals about what to do with the second airport. And these guys think they can do it through Carlsbad. They've got a bunch of Embraer 170s, which is a really nice airplane, fairly efficient airplane. I think they've got 5 of them that'll be coming in on lease, and they intend to start flying by the end of the summer. And I was surprised again with the amount of interest they had in a place like Great Falls because they see the potential for a summer backhaul into Montana for tourism, and then the potential that San Diego as a destination out of here might work. They're real interested in doing some kind of like Allegiant does, where they might fly, once a week or twice a week type flights into a market like that. So, that was an interesting one. Another interesting one is People's Express is apparently coming back to life. You may remember the East Coast carrier, People's Express, out of Newport News. So hypothetically, they're going to start flying this summer. So we're beginning to see the void that's been created by the legacy carriers as they've cut service into these smaller communities is beginning to be filled by point-to-point people, kind of like Allegiant has done, but with a slightly different slant to it, where they're picking a big tourism destination and saying, well, I can fly into the secondary markets, forget LA to San Diego. I mean, there's already plenty of service in that market. I can go to Albuquerque, San Diego, because no one flies it. And I've got enough capacity, I've got enough people there that would fly there to fill my flight once or twice a week. So we're beginning to see somewhat of a network of these smaller independent carriers doing these things that I think eventually could become real opportunities for us, kind of like Allegiant has, to pick up 1 or 2 cities that they would fly to relatively infrequently that would give us a potential for new markets over the next 5-10 years. So an interesting development there. The last thing I was going to mention, we did open bids, well, I've got 2 more, I guess. We did open bids today on the parking project, the expansion of the parking lot, the 130 stalls we've talked about. The pricing wasn't as good as we had hoped. We'd hoped for completion of the entire project for about $250,000. And our bid results, Bill, can you help me out with that again? To do the first 100 stalls is about $200,000, is it not?
Yeah, 199,764, 98,000 for the other 38, so 298 would be your total for the 130 stalls.
We'd hope to complete it all under $250,000. The second set of 30 stalls at almost $100,000 seems like a too steep of a pace, and we haven't had much time to talk about it because I think we opened these bids at about 11. Our current thinking is we would proceed with the 100 and hold on to 40 until we can get better oil pricing. The 100 pricing is not that great, but it still comes in around about $2,100 a stall.
Yeah, 2,130 a stall.
2,130 a stall. 2,000 a stall doesn't seem that bad. The second set of stalls works out to $2,700. Just seems a little rich. So our thinking is get the 100 stalls. We also have a plan if we get into next summer and we want another 30 stalls. If you've been in the parking lot, there, to the left, the concrete sidewalk to the left is twice the size of the one on the right. There's 2 of them out there, kind of islands that go out as a walkway. There's enough room in there where we can cut the island in half and get slanted stalls in there, get about the same number of stalls, 36 stalls, And we think we could do that. What were you thinking?
$35,000.
$35,000. So we think money would be better spent by going and getting the 30 stalls there right now if we want them. We're not in a rush for that last 30. The 67 stalls are now fully open in the employee lot, and that has taken a lot of the demand. We haven't, the first 2 weeks of April, we were still filling the main lot down to probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen stalls. It was getting pretty full. But with 100 more stalls, we think we've got plenty of capacity to get us through at least a year. And then if we decide we want more stalls next year, we can get a full 70 stalls between the two projects, or we can go with the cheaper of them and take out that island and get 30 stalls in. So I think what we would, we have authorization from the last meeting. We said we'd spend up to $250,000. We don't have enough authorization as it's worked out to do all the stalls, but we have enough to do the first 100. And we think that's the better money right now, is to go ahead and get the 100 in, but not go after the other 38 to finish out the lot. That's kind of where we're positioned today.
Any comments, JC?
I was down at Billings over Easter, and the setback from the terminal building is nowhere near as far as ours is here. They've really only got just a 2-lane road between the terminal building and their parking. And we lost a terrible number of parking places here for this
Commercial.
damn security stuff. I don't know if we can get them back.
It's a possibility. I mean, we're fortunate that this came up. We have a high-quality master plan over here in John Van Wonsel. But I mean, I'd be hesitant about taking much more out of that roadway, only because I see in the future, as the capacity grows, what we may want to do is to try and, where the island is today, move the island over some, so that we've got some areas that are set up for people that want to stop and drop off, and then some very clear divided through lanes for the people that are just trying to get through there, and some entry and exit, in and out of there, to try and get more capacity through that curve. It doesn't jam up today, but around Christmas time, it can be a pretty big mess out there with people loading and unloading. And anytime I can get more room between the parking and the terminal, SeaTac's a great example. Years ago that was lots of room, but now if you go, it's like the bazaar in Calcutta. I mean, it's a mess, and you don't even want to try to get through it. I was just there last week, and so anytime I can get more space in there, I like to do it, because over time you'll want that. The logical expansion plan for this terminal through time, and we don't have a master plan that supports it, would be to double deck the road. You get a ton of capacity if you can have departures and arrivals on separate levels. Because then the departure guys would come in on the second floor, you'd extend the rest of the lid out over it, and your ticketing would move upstairs into the space that you just expanded. And then arrivals, the bag claim would expand, we only have one belt today, would expand into the other hole down below, and you would have all the arrivals down there. So I'm hesitant. John, and I appreciate your thoughts. I know this is kind of cold, but what are your thoughts? I mean, just in terms of that curb front, and kind of, is that what you would think too? Or?
Yeah, and the other thing is with security, maintain status, you have to be a certain distance from the building with your parking. So a lot of airports have parking too close. They think they have good capacity for parking, and then there's an orange or a status change of security nationwide, and all of a sudden they lose several rows of parking and have to put up big concrete barriers and temporarily, really in bind. But in general, having more space is a good thing, because you end up needing it, and that delineation with your parking lot tends to become more and more permanent over time. More and more infrastructure goes in place. If you ever do a garage or something like that, that really sets the boundary. So a little bit more room is a good way to go.
They did have plans for a garage at Billings, but it interfered with the approach to one of the runways. I don't remember which one.
If you ever hear me rail on garages,
that's a pricey problem.
Yeah, it is. You end up paying, if you're lucky, you get away with $18,000 to $20,000 a stall. And my hometown airport, Dayton, Ohio, just put in their garage. You get forced into charging $12, $15 a day, and what that does is it opens the door for somebody to buy a lot next to you and open up a surface lot for $6 a day and run their van back and forth. It's just you're lucky if you can get a parking garage to last 30 years in a cold environment, because the concrete just doesn't want to do it. You know, so you take out debt, you do this massive project at $20,000 a stall. You're lucky if you get it paid for by the time the bonds, you know, go out. And then your margins today, you know, it's almost all gravy. I mean, you're building at $2,000 a stall, and our stalls are making, you know, $5,000–6,000 a year. You know, so you know, you've got this great profitable business that all gets sucked into paying for debt service, and you know, with the parking garages, so the rate impact ends up being pretty high. You know, so boy, I try to stay away from parking garages whenever I can. That's just, you know, planners and other folks probably have other thoughts about that.
Well, they have a real mess down there with their parking.
Oh, I don't
Far
doubt it.
worse than ours.
Yeah, we're going to have a mess one day, but you know, hopefully we can plan our way out of it, maybe with, you know, the use of some space over here when the concourse goes down the middle.
Any other questions for Director Faulkner on any items? Was there?
I got one more.
other item.
Yeah, it's just a quick note. The PFC application we filled out late last fall has finally been approved. There was not a whole lot of new money in that. We asked for reimbursement of projects we've done in past years, things like our snow broom we bought. We reimbursed ourselves, which just simply meant the money went from being restricted to now being available for any use. The reserve balance doesn't change; it just changes, you know, what we can do with it. And then the only new money that was in that, you may recall, we put in there matching dollars for our noise program. So we now have $600,000 in matching funds that we can use for noise. Not that we have to, but it is available. As Sharon and I were talking today, there's no magic to how that's spent year by year. We had filled out an application, excuse me. Oh boy, it's hot here. we had filled out an application that said $85,000 a year with what we would spend, but you know, if we collect more than that, we can apply that in any way we want. But just to note, the PFC application is approved.
Okay, great. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Director. We'll go to the optimization study presentation. And John, do you want to introduce our friends from CH2M Hill here?
Absolutely. The optimization study is a project CH2M Hill has been working on now for it's been a year. We have a great consulting team of John Van Woensel, who is standing there putting the projector together. He's a planner by trade, and then you all probably remember Bill Van Herky. He's been up here a couple of times. He's the engineer from CH2M Hill that works on our construction projects. And they're the two leads of the disciplines we have here, the planning and the engineering. In a sense, the runway project combines both of those types of disciplines. Because what we want to know is what is the best long-term answer for our crosswind runway, and part of the answer to that involves the current status of the existing runways and what kind of condition they're in. CH2M Hill and John Van Woensel here are going to tell us about the findings that they've had over the last year looking at our crosswind runway configuration.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We also have Thierry Sarr here with the CH2M Hill, also airport planner.
John, I'm sorry, I missed his name.
You're fine.
I'm Thierry Sarr.
Okay, Terry, welcome. Glad to have you. Can we have the lights off? That'll probably help us a little bit. Thank you.
That's harder to do than...
Oh, it is harder to do.
Yeah, here.
Isn't it?
There, we got
There we
it.
go.
Excellent.
There we go. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
As John said, the optimization study is underway. We're done with a lot of our analysis, but now we're looking at all this information we've gathered, trying to figure out what it means, and we're going to come back, talk to users again. We've been in conversations with a number of organizations and people here at the airport, and we're I would say 75–80% done with the whole study. As John said, the need for the study is FAA has indicated that they're no longer able as an agency to pay for all these crosswind runways that exist around the country. Florida is probably the worst offender, if you want to use that term, in that there's a lot of World War II leftover fields in Florida with 2–3 crosswinds sometimes. Not only do they intersect in many cases or have geometry that today we would try to avoid, but also it's excess pavement. Usually maybe one crosswind is needed at a lot of these airports. And so when you apply FAA standards, you have these extra runways. FAA has to pay for the pavement rehab or replacement every 15–20 years, as well as instrumentation, lights, and everything else. So all the airport does the upkeep, of course. So FAA, like many other agencies, has seen its funding shrink, more responsibilities have been added to the agency, so they simply have less capital funding. And they're saying let's focus on the safety, capacity projects for runways that are really needed and justified. So you've been told that same message here. Okay, you have 2 crosswind runways. You don't really need them, we think. Take a look at it. Tell us which one do we keep, and is there justification for even upgrading or extending them? That's a question we added. That's not a question FAA asked. They're just looking at taking stuff out of the inventory, not expanding anything at this point. So those are the questions we'll be looking at in the study. A little bit of background on the airfield, because everybody has a different degree of familiarity with the airport. This is rotated awkwardly to fit it on the slide. So this is runway 321 over here. When this runway was upgraded and got the better ILS capability on it, there was a vertical curve issue, and the runway was flattened out, which raised this portion of the runway here up some. This runway 163.4, this is the 3-4 end, was connected in the past. That was disconnected, and since this came up, there's now a bit of a drop-off here. It's not tremendous, but there's a drop-off, and this is a permanent disconnection. Some of this pavement was abandoned, it's now marked as an overrun or blast pad, not used for takeoff. The runway then starts here. It gives you about 5,700 feet of runway that's available. There's a displacement here, but this is runway all the way to there. So that's a 5,700-foot runway. There's an issue we're looking into because it's only declared to be available for a little bit more than 5,000 in the more important direction, which is this direction. So we're looking into that. Right now you have 5,000 in that direction, 57 this way. This is runway 725, it's narrower. Oh, one thing I should mention about this, you can tell right away, it's a wide runway. It's 150 feet wide. This is a D4 width. D is the approach speed of the aircraft, 4 is the size of the aircraft. That's a large aircraft runway, but it doesn't have shoulders off the side of the runway. So that means it's really meant for use by a C3 aircraft. Still pretty big, it's Boeing 737 category aircraft. So there's an investment that FAA made in the past, the airport made in that runway that's still there. The 725 is the other crosswind runway. It is still connected to the main runway, and that's known as a hotspot. That's the geometry of layout that FAA doesn't like anymore. It could be confusing. People could make a wrong turn and end up on runway instead of a taxiway or a wrong runway. That's very bad. So today's agency thinking is, let's remove those opportunity tracks and then be making a wrong turn and disconnecting that. So that's something that we'll be looking at over time. But this is a B2 runway. The category is smaller, it's only 75 feet wide. Also the pavement on this runway is much worse than the 160 before. It's also much thinner pavement because it has a different type of aircraft on it. And you see, what I wanted to mention here is a runway that's not on the run out there right now. This is a runway that was proposed in the previous airport master plan. The airport is currently on the official plan. It doesn't change until you adopt a new plan. It stays out there. That was planned for capacity purposes, to be an air carrier runway. It's not justified if you look at your activity level. You typically need 200,000 or more operations before a significant capacity improvement is needed. You're doing 80 or less. So you're doing less than half of what's needed for a second runway in terms of capacity. You don't need it for capacity purposes. There's no harm in leaving it there because it actually protects airspace out in this direction, So if someone wants to put out more windmills out here, it's getting awfully close. FAA would say, wait a minute, there's a proposed runway there, can't do that. So there's no harm in leaving it on there. But it's what FAA has in their plans, it's all to be parallel, all the more reason for them to think let's get rid of the crosswinds. We're now saying, well, you probably don't need that parallel for quite some time, if ever. And really the emphasis needs to be on these crosswinds, or at least one of them. So that's some background on the airport.
And John, you might mention too, or well, I can mention, the previous master plan had 1634 closing. That was in the last plan. It was shown on there as closing, and 725 was going to be improved.
So the steps we're going to go through to come up with objective findings and make a recommendation to the board and to the FAA is first we're going to analyze the wind. Okay, you've heard stories about the winds in the north. We've experienced the winds in the north, almost were diverted to Kalispell the other day. So we're familiar with that. FAA uses annual averages. There's a lot of wind data out there. We went through 20 years worth of wind data. That's one of the things we did. We looked at other reasons to have a crosswind runway. Winds are a predominant reason, but sometimes accident records can help you. What I mean by that sounds awkward is that if there's a history of incidents because of wind, well, that helps your case. Say we need to keep that crosswind, so we looked into that. Yeah, the change in fleet mix, C-130s are probably coming. We need to consider that because what will happen to the aircraft? What will they be flying? We know now it's probably the C-130s. Will they need to crosswind runway? That obviously is a much bigger aircraft. That's approach category C, but it's got a Group 4 wing on it, and way bigger aircraft. So that figures into it. Design standards, FAA has a whole series of guidance out there you must follow for safety reasons, of course. We've talked about runway width, pavement strength, but length is also important. Certain aircraft need a lot more than others, and when we're talking about a crosswind, just because these runways have a certain length today doesn't mean it's good forever and ever, so we looked at that as well. And then lastly, we'll look at some physical alternatives, look at costs, critical to FAA, and ultimately make a recommendation. So let me walk through the steps real quick. One other thing I wanted to mention is there's two paths to take here. This is simplification. The end result is repaving one of the two runways, possibly extending one of the two. But you get there a different way. If we were to say that 725 is a better runway to just repave as is, you follow this process here. Studies, there's a design, there's an FAA approval needed if the funding is high enough. In this case, it's probably not even needed. You go to design and repave, that's it. If you were to say, let's extend the runway, this could be either 725 the way it is or 1634 the way it is. P is the way it is. If you were to say, well, let's extend the runway, now you're changing the category of aircraft that can operate on there. That's a substantial change possibly, especially if you're talking about commercial activity. That means you need to do the National Environmental Policy Act study, environmental assessment, EIS, or CADX, or the types of study. Now you're looking at, is the project needed in the foreseeable future? Do you have a purpose and need? You need to look at alternatives, what impacts there might be. You're doing noise contours and all that. So it can get fairly costly if it's a substantial change. So I wanted to point that out because you're talking about an extension, even if it's justified, you're talking about a lot more time, a lot more studying to get approvals to be able to do that. So we'll summarize the wind analysis. I've talked about this. I did want to mention we're aware of the winds in winter, which people have told us about. We found in the data last year about 20 to 30 flights were canceled or diverted commercial flights, so that's pretty typical. So we're taking that into consideration. We're looking at winds. FAA has some guidance out there. Those are advisory circulars are on the web. They make those available. That's what we have to go by. And they're looking at annual averages. When you look at the life of a runway, it's 20 years. FAA looks at long justifications, long paybacks. So their whole mindset is to the overall benefit of a runway, not certain days of problematic weather. And that's important to understand. 95% is their standard. If you have 95% coverage for your aircraft type on your main runway, so you can use it within crosswind limits, you're good. That's not perfection at all. It's 95%. So 5%, 1 out of 20, you would not be able to fly. So if you multiply that times a year, significant number of days. And FAA says that's fine, as long as you're 95 or better. The other point is if you have a particular aircraft category that can't meet that 95% category, then you can plan crosswind runway but just for those aircraft. And that's important because the aircraft that are more sensitive to the crosswinds are smaller aircraft. So we looked at wind data, and I'll go through this quickly because it's getting hotter in the room. It's the total coverage on the airfield on the main runway is 93.56, so just short of 94%. So you're just short on your main runway. So if you were building this airport today, you almost could get away with just your main runway. And if you have a hard case making even for a single crosswind. We looked at the crosswind separately, and this is the 20 years of data that Cheery went through. It's available from the Weather Service. This runway 164, has 2.8%. This runway has 3.9%. So each of them either of them, I should say, adds enough to get you over 95. So we were hoping this wind data would tell us clearly which runway we want to go with, but it really isn't. Because either one gets you over 95, that's all FAA-3 cares about, it's good enough. So we really don't have anything helpful there from the data. Here's the plot. I'll go through this quickly because we do lots of plots. This is the compass rose with the wind direction. Of course, the red line is the main runway, so you can see just how well that's aligned with the prevailing winds. The strength, the wind strength is out farther, and the direction is on the compass rose. It's a windy place, so if you plot the wind out, you can see how this is the annual wind rose, same information, but just dropped on the map. This is annual. We did it seasonally. We even looked at specific wind observations in all that data to see if there's a story about needing a crosswind other than just the averages. So you can see 7 to 11, 11 to 17, very common winds here, pretty rare elsewhere. Most airports have those columns shifted to the left. You have a much windier place here in general. We looked at it seasonally. Winter, look at how far out that high wedge is. I hope I'm not blocking too many people. Winter is the strongest season for wind, which most of you probably already knew. Does it work? And we did it seasonally. Spring season, winds come down a lot. In summer, much quieter, and then back in the fall, strong winds. So that's kind of the picture of the wind data. We also looked at other justifications. I mentioned accidents. We went through 20 years worth of data, talked to the military, found some accidents. Where the wind was an issue or a contributing factor, it was on the taxiway where light aircraft had a problem or flipped. Not so much runways. We found almost nothing. We were aware through talking to you that there were several military accidents, some of which were wind related. We talked to them. They don't keep their records. They only keep them for a month or two and then they throw them away unless there's a lawsuit. So we're hoping to have a treasure trove of documentation that I guess like they're building, they're storing our records. So that was too bad. So that really didn't help us in terms of the story. So the preliminary findings are that either runway, in fact even closed perpendicular runway, any crosswind runway will get you about 95%. So we need to look at it a different way. When you look at what kind of runway, we looked at the fleet mix. B2 is a GA category, fairly large GA. Not all fast business jets, some of those have a higher approach category. It's easily justified. The question is, what about C3? And we'll talk about that here in a minute, because that's what you have and that we like to keep. FAA puts out a forecast, and over time, operations, which is what this is, aircraft, movements have been coming down. FAA is projecting very slight growth. We'll update the forecast in upcoming complete master plan, but for now we just use this to take a quick look at the fleet mix. Here's the aircraft that operate here. It's probably small to read, but you've got the RJs, you've got a whole variety of smaller aircraft, and you've got an MD-83 in the mix. You have an interesting fleet mix with a fair bit of C3 aircraft in there. That's the key point here. And airlines like Legion are only increasing service. That's an aircraft that needs a lot of runway. It's a very big aircraft. So we looked at that to figure out the design group. This is a breakdown of the use by runway and by aircraft type. That's not data the tower keeps. They keep it just by airport, not by runway end. But this was developed during the Part 50 noise study. You may remember that we used that utilization, verified that the tower that's still active. What we're trying to get to is the activity of the crosswind, of course. That's why we're trying to pull this apart. Design standards. Here you can see some of the activity. Air carrier run 100 operations on 1634. I'll tell you why that number is important in a minute. Air taxi 209. So you can see there's 1,500, 1,200, there's 2,900. You're talking a couple thousand operations on the crosswind, probably 1,000 or so by the larger aircraft. And pure C3 is probably 100 or more. And we say probably because that data is not kept that way, but we pulled it apart from the various records. That's important because FAA's cutoff that you had up there earlier is for design standards is 500 operations. It's considered regular use. That's today's rather rigid definition. You either have 500 ops or you don't. If you don't have them, you can't design around the aircraft. If you do, you can. So if you have a couple hundred operations, you're really in the binds because you have aircraft on the runway, but you can't design around the aircraft. It's a little awkward, that's how it works today. And that's why we tried to find these numbers. So when you look at the width, Group C airframes, you have activity, and clearly you have a C3 runway out there today. So if you wanted to be really black and white about it, do you have 500 operations on a C3 aircraft today? No, you don't. So you design for the next smaller category, which would be B2, which is what 725 is today. So in your alternatives, you'd either be looking at a narrow 1634, or you'd be looking at maintaining 725. That's it. You give up your C3 capability on the secondary runway, which is a tremendous loss.
Right, which to summarize means none of the commercial airplanes could land on the crosswind runway. When we had significant crosswinds exceeding the capability of the commercial fleet, they would just all divert.
And they're using it now, even though there's no taxiway really over to it. So it's just that the activity is not quite there the way FAA likes to see it. And when they apply these standards of whether 500 is good enough or not, that's all about finance. It's all about eligibility for capital funding. So unfortunately, that's kind of the picture we're looking at. We looked at runway takeoff to see what length you need. There's a whole bunch of aircraft in here. I won't read them all. And the red bar adds the hops distance on how the aircraft needs more runway length. You can see the length along the bottom. We marked the runways on here for reference. 725 is over here. You can see it's too short for most aircraft on a hot day. You've got 1634 here, and that's pretty good length. At 5700, but you only have in one direction. And FAA uses a grouping of aircraft when you get to smaller runways, and that fits right in there. So 57, 55 is about the right length for planning purposes. You can see the C3 aircraft, some of them need a lot more length, and of course that's what you have your main runway for, which is good for that under most circumstances. So 5,500 feet is the number that we think is the minimum that you should be planning for any future runway. That's longer than 725 is today. It's, just about a little shorter than 1634 is today. So if we were to look at 725, you have to look at an extension. These key findings, I just kind of overlap a little bit, but in the case of a new runway, let me just highlight these. In the case of a new runway, you can only really justify B2 at 5,500 logs. So if 725 is your runway, that's all you have. In fact, FAA is not even really on board with 55. If you're looking at the other runway, 1634, you could narrow it down to C3, so you abandon the outer strips of pavement, and you narrow it to 100 feet wide, use 25 feet either end of shoulder, so you just restripe it essentially. Now you have a full C3 runway, and you keep the existing length. So those are some of the options we're looking at in a minute here. And C3 ultimately would be justified, but right now, using FAA's rigid definition, you just don't quite have the activity. If it's an existing runway, it would seem that it's an easier case to make, so that's what we're exploring right now. So we went to alternatives, we looked at 11 options.
John, just before you jump into alternatives, as I said last month, one of the key considerations, which the FAA doesn't consider at all, is if we go down to that 75-foot width, or if we go down to a length beyond or shorter than 5,500 feet, one of the problems we're going to end up with is when we have to do a major rework on the 321 runway, we'll simply be out of business for commercial flights. They won't be able to land on 75-foot runway, and they won't be able to take off on anything short of 5,700 feet. And even on a hot day, that gets even worse. So, even still, if we're able to keep 1634 and get it out to 5,700 feet, we'll have to work our construction seasons at close 321 around hot weather. We'll have to work in the spring and fall, which other airports do. But what becomes very problematic, if we don't have an alternative at all that works for any of the commercial flights, now we're simply out of business, and it becomes very, very difficult and expensive to accommodate a construction project in those types of situations. And we've seen it around the country. A number of airports have had to close for a repaving project and those types of things. So, as I said last month, one of the key things that we've got to get done is we've got to rework one of these runways, hopefully to have a commercial aircraft capability over the next 10 to 15 years before we have to do a major rework on the mainline runway so that we have an alternative and we can stay operational during that period.
And one thing I'd add on that also is not just your commercial service, but with the change in mission of Maine, going to larger aircraft, it's going to be a really important part also to have a runway that can handle the type of aircraft that they're going to use versus the fighters that you have right now.
Right.
So because we're kind of between B2 and C3, we looked at both widths. So the B2 width is 75 feet, C3 is 100. And we looked at alternatives for both runway, and we stripped some of them out right away because it just didn't make any sense. So we were left with two main alternatives and then did variants of them to explore that. We're still tweaking them. So here's the whole range of them. I won't worry about that. I'll just focus on ones that we actually carried forward. So you see here, under alternative one, all of the ones are 1634. Leave the length at 150 feet, go down to 100, which is still C3 but with shoulders, paved shoulders, or go down to a pure B2 scenario, which is 75 feet wide, half the current width on that runway. And then alternative 2 is variance, and this is the one we have right now. The length is 725 to 5,500 feet, which is the length that you have as width. That's a B2 runway of 75 feet, which is the existing width, which would be longer. Two other things to mention real quick is you have to deconnect that runway, disconnect it from 321 because you have the hotspot. And let's look at the pictures. These are described as standing here waving my hands. So here's the first one. Repave as is at 150 feet. This bold number is sort of the immediate cost. There's some taxiway. We put that in there to sort of look ahead to any other costs to come later, like the blue taxiway. So what you see here is we took taxiway A5 and connected it. You don't know if this geometry works because there's a drop off, but you could either come up this way, you could move this a little bit. The point is, this is the concept. We put a taxiway in here connecting to the runway to make it more usable.
So from 321 to 1634 is where that taxiway attaches.
And then you have your existing length here. This is a turnaround, so people that end up on that other runway can turn around. Essentially, you repave at 150 feet. Cost is almost $10 million, including the initial taxiway. So that's pricey, but it keeps your whole 150 feet. The next version is 100 feet. So everything's pretty much the same. The red is the shoulders, and now the cost drops just a little bit, $500,000 or so to $9.5 million. Because you're still redoing most of that same pavement.
And you're also pulling in your lights in that scenario, so that adds a little cost to it.
So the next version, you do some more of that. The red gets wider, and now we're looking at just a B2 runway. We've narrowed it all the way down to 75 feet, half the width. You're still spending $8.5 million to do that. So not tremendous savings. So you could say, boy, to cut off of C3 all the way to B2, you lose that air capability. You talk about less than $1 million difference in your project. And then next is the 725. And again, for orientation, this is 321. So this is 1634 we were just looking at. This is the closed runway. You'd extend it, but before you extend it, you'd have to disconnect first to get fixed at hotspot. Hotspot is not something you have to fix today, but it's been flagged. And like a highway standard, that's no longer currently. Next time you fix that exit, you bring it up to standard. So if you were to rehab this runway, that's probably the time to disconnect that, shift it a couple hundred feet, which of course moves it, and then you need to extend it to 5,500 feet. So you're talking about a pretty big shift. Property acquisition, road changes, gets expensive. Now you're also extending the runway, so that flow chart I showed you earlier, now you're doing an environmental assessment of sorts because you're changing the capability of the runway. So that adds time, approvals, and further cost. $14 million, so that's more expensive than doing projects on 1634, and you end up with a lesser runway. So there's variants of this we can look at. We've been talking to FAA, but pretty clear that this is a very pricey way to go, and probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And I think that's one policy consideration to debate as we look at adopting the study next month. We haven't acquired land in a very long time. Now, there's two ways that can happen. Either you have a willing party out there that would want to work with us, or potentially if you don't, you'd have to condemn it. But either way, we haven't been in the property acquisition business in a while, and that's something we have to really consider as an organization. Is that something we're willing to take on, to go out and buy land for an expansion like that? Some airports do, and some airports have a policy against that type of acquisition. So it's just a policy thing to consider. With should we pursue a 725?
And one of the things I want to add is one of the reasons 725 is more expensive is because of we did some geotechnical investigations of both runways, and 725 was originally built for much lighter aircraft than 1634. Because of that, you have a lot larger stresses, and you have a runway that's really not capable of handling the type of aircraft that you would get on that runway if you only had one crosswind. So you're looking at more of a rebuild of that runway. You're looking at, it's only 3 inches of asphalt right now. You're taking all that asphalt out, adding in substantial amount of additional asphalt to handle the weight of the aircraft, and then of course you have shouldering and safety area work and all those things that go along with it. And that's one of the primary reasons, on top of the NEPA action, on top of the land acquisition, on top of the extension, that 725 becomes a much more expensive proposition.
So where we are at this point in the studies, I mentioned early on, we have this discrepancy in what they call declared distances and the usability of the runway. It's 1634. It appears, and we're still sorting through the details of FAA, but it appears when they were repaving 321 and disconnecting the runway that it got declared conservatively, so short in one direction. It looks to us like you can redeclare runway 34 to be 5,700 feet long and usable. And that gets you, that's like a paper runway extension. It basically gets you 700 feet, fairly quickly at minimal cost or no cost. So that's something, the first thing that is already becoming clear. We want to pursue that. More runway is always better. We are thinking it makes more sense to preserve 1634 and ideally 100 feet or so with shoulders rather than spend money on 725. 725 would be abandoned over time. You wouldn't immediately rip it up, but as that pavement deteriorated, you'd stop using it. You might use it as a taxiway in the interim to get to 1634 and then build a taxiway to 1634, or decommission 725 as a taxiway when pavement is no longer acceptable. So you have a phasing time frame there, and you wouldn't shut that down immediately at all. Preserving that C3 capability at the airport on the secondary runway, we think is key. We're trying to look into that as much as we can to make sure we achieve that. We have that shoulder we talked about. So the next steps are for us, we're going to complete our analysis. We're here for some more meetings to get more data, run all the people who are missing anything. Then we'll wrap it up after the airport approves the study and the board adopts the study, goes to FAA. We're coordinating with FAA to get a read on this, but we're not formally giving them anything until the board adopts it and we give them the study. Then once they approve, you could go to design, and another action in this area is this updating of the CIP with FAA, the amount of money they reserve in 2014, 2015 for the construction of the project. So that's where we are today with it.
John, just a question on, great presentation, by the way, thank you for that. On the 1634, going from the C3 to the D4 classification, on the D4, do we have, is like the FedEx 757-200 that comes in here, is that a D4?
Yes.
Okay, so.
D4, 75s and 76s.
So, in the event that FedEx has got the larger aircraft coming in, and in the event that they can't land on the main runway, and they'd have to use the secondary runway, if it were C3, they really couldn't land it, could they? Is that true or not true?
So if we went to 100 feet,
if you went to the 100
with
feet,
25-foot shoulders,
yeah.
The question is, could they land?
That kind of gets back to the point that John was making earlier, in that to design for it, you have 500 operations. Just because it's C3 doesn't mean that they can't elect to land on it and utilize it in certain instances. So that type of aircraft, you know, wingspan, main gear has the capacity to be able to land on that runway. It's up to the user as to whether they want to do that or defer. So it doesn't mean that it would be impossible for them to. It just isn't designed for the standards to handle it under normal factors.
And those are, you know, I mean, the thing to think about with those airplanes is they're going to be a little less susceptible because it's a bigger plane to the wind, so the crosswind component is going to be higher for them. I don't know on that one in particular what their critical speed is, but, you know, for instance, a 10-mile-an-hour wind is not, you know, crosswind would not stop a 757 where it would a Cessna in a lot of cases. So, you know, and then on top of that, the control on that runway, the pilot's going to be a lot more concerned about the takeoff than the landing. You know, so, I mean, if you have a pilot like that, they might choose to land on the crosswind, you know, whereas they wouldn't take off. And, you know, they're betting that the crosswind condition would subside by the time it's time to take off because they've got to go unload the plane, reload the plane. He's hoping by then the wind's going to dissipate enough that he can use the main line for the takeoff.
And I think the bottom line question that I have here is how critical is it to take it from 150 down to 100 even though you're preserving the 150-foot width on the runway?
Well, one of the problems, and John pointed this out, and I hadn't thought of it, but we don't have any shoulders on the existing 1634, so it doesn't meet the design standard for a D4 today. So if it doesn't meet the standard, basically it falls down to a C3 no matter what.
Gotcha.
You know, so even though it's 150 feet wide, we would have the exact same capability as 100 feet with shoulders today.
So you might as well just go to that route.
That's, I mean, I don't know, John, am I missing
Yeah, that's
something?
true, and the other point is that there's no way the FAA would accept that.
Right.
They want to see a reduction in pavement and category runway in their inventory, so to speak. And leaving it as a sort of a D4, C3, 150-foot width, they're not willing to allow that.
And even C3 is going to be a difficult discussion. One of the things that, you know, we're looking for some more details. I'm actually meeting with Mang on Friday, but, you know, with the introduction of C-130 here, which we haven't had, you know, obviously in the past, its training requirements are different, as you might imagine, than the F-15. A couple of the things that they're going to do, we're told, is the first is they're going to do what they call these hot unloads or hot loads or something like that, where they fly over the runway at a low elevation, they drop cargo out the back. And then the other thing is they want to fly lights out approaches with the night vision goggles. And, you know, both of those things have a serious potential to interfere with the other operations of the airport. We have flights in until 11 o'clock at night. You know, and we don't want them dropping junk on the runway that they have to then clean up and wait for everyone to get off the runway before we can land again. So, you know, if those are things that they do want to do here, and of course we want to accommodate those, the logical solution would be to put them on 1634 for those types of operations. And in our SOPs with the Guard, to designate that as the training runway for those types of operations. Now that does two things. First of all, it increases the reliability of 321 because we're not having those situations that could result in issues, you know, out on our runway, and the tower's not turning the lights off and on to accommodate one operation because they don't just do it once when they do that. They shoot approaches for hours, you know. So you know you're going to be off and on as the commercial flights come in, or as a GA pilot tries to land, you know, where they're turning the lights off and on. It'd be much, you know, simpler to simply turn the lights out on 1634, note them the runway out, and let them train for a night, you know, something like that. So, you know, we think, you know, there's going to be more justification with the C-130 coming in than there is currently with the F-15s because of the size of that airframe and its unique training environment. So on Friday I'll meet with Mang, and that's one of the things I've told him I would like to talk about is, you know, the operational needs and how we can accommodate that and how that informs the tail end of this optimization study.
Yeah, it's really good news because it may help the justification for keeping the C3 standard on that runway.
And you're not asking for any action here. This is purely presentation.
First reading, yeah,
First
the working.
Any questions from the board for John or anyone? It's really a very good presentation. You don't think the low-level dropping of the cargo on 10th Avenue South at 3 in the morning is that viable? You don't think that would cut it?
No.
Okay, all right. Well, John, thank you very much for a great presentation and very insightful.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I might mention that last night we had a GA committee meeting, Commissioners Talcott, Tripula, and myself were there. Good showing of the GA community. Much the same presentation was made to the GA community. And I believe that the general consensus was that 1634 is the preferred alternative for a crosswind runway, and it has full support.
Great, thank you for that, JC. That's good. That's good to know. Great. All right, well, again, thank you for that presentation. We'll go to Airport Authority Board comments. Commissioner Talcott.
I have no other comment except for, again, attending that meeting last night, there was, it just seems that when we get right down to 1634 is the only alternative, so it's just a matter of going through the proper process to get there, because that's what we have to do. And so, it's time to move forward in that direction, I would say.
Great, great. Anything else? Thank you. Commissioner Swenson? Commissioner Shapiro?
I agree with Commissioner Talcott.
All right, great. JC?
Present.
Any comments?
No comments.
No comments. I just had one item, and then, John, did you want to cover that one item?
Yeah, sure.
You want me to just cover this? And yeah, then you can cover that. I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention, Owen handled this, and I'll pass this around, but this, Laura, who did this again?
The CVB did.
CVB. You want to just talk just a minute about what this is? It's fantastic. It's kind of a Discover travel guide thing for Great Falls, but how would you describe it?
It's a Great Falls Visitor's Guide, and we haven't had anything like this in the past, so it was a piece that the CVB worked on. Carol Lindstedt did a tremendous amount of work on it, so if you see her, tell her good job. All the pictures, I mean, have come together. People donated the pictures. We actually just printed, I think it was 100,000, so they're going to be going all across the state, and out of state being distributed in the certified rack, and then we'll have them up here, just everywhere. And it was trying to be all encompassing of what you could do when you were here in Great Falls. So it'll be a work in progress going forward each year. We're looking at the CVB at getting proper software in-house to be able to make corrections to it so that we can continue to put it out at a lower cost, hopefully, going forward. What's your question?
What's the CVB?
Convention Visitors Bureau.
Oh, okay. I didn't try that one.
The airport has been partnering with them quite a bit because of all the marketing that they do. And like this morning, they just approved putting an additional $15,000 towards the airport's marketing plan that we're doing for Frontier. So.
Yes, that is really very first class.
That's a nice piece.
Excellent.
That's the dollar per night, is it, or is that the difference?
TBID is $1 per night. This is bed tax dollars.
Oh, bed tax.
But yeah, TBID is the one that gets the $1 a night. And they've actually been a great partner too, and they assisted with some of this as well.
Great. Thanks, Laura. John?
Yeah, one other announcement. I had it here in my director's report, but I was talking and skipped over it. You all may know that Sharon has announced she's planning to retire, much to our chagrin, and we tried to talk around it, but nothing's worked yet. So over the last couple of months, we have been in search for a new assistant director of finance. We did extend an offer and get an affirmative response from Maria Curley. She spent about 6 years at the Portland Jetport, which is the Portland in Maine, as their accounting person and finance person. They're a combined city government, Department of Transportation, so she also, for a time, covered the port. Interestingly enough, she did accounting for both the airport and the port. She came very highly recommended from the director that was there at the time, Jeff Schultes. It's his name. He's now the director in El Paso. But we did talk to him about that. She also spent about a year at McCarran in Las Vegas in their accounting department. A few years ago, they had a fairly good rift when America West pulled down that as a hub. only to see Allegiant build it right back up over the last 5 years. And so about the last 5-6 years, she's been selling retirement programs in the Las Vegas area and investments and things like that. She's scheduled to start at the end of June, and so she'll be up here after the graduation of her daughter from high school down that way. And Sharon's promised that she'll help us some over the next few months in the summer to get Maria trained up. But we're really excited to have somebody that comes to us from a somewhat of a similar community, similar airport environment, to come in and help us with those financial responsibilities, accounting responsibilities going forward. So we're looking forward to introducing Maria to you. Jim met Maria during her interview and tour of Great Falls. Gosh, has it been 2 months already? It's a month and a half ago. And we brought her out to talk to her, and we're real excited to get her. So we'll see her in June.
Did you threaten Sharon?
We haven't tried that yet. I have a big chain and a lock. You know,
I was going to ask you about the ball and chain.
Have you tried giving her an raise?
Sharon, are you interested?
Oh, we are going to need to see Sharon go. Is there anything from the staff needs to bring up today? Anything from the general public? How about the air conditioning, John?
I'm hoping.
All right, seeing no further comment, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and we will start up. We'll take about an 8-minute break, and let's try to start around 2:30 if we could for the work session.
The gift shop doesn't sell Slurpees, do they?